This is the third video tutorial for the STELLA 1.1 device, and we'll cover how to put together the DisplayBoard unit. This unit will connect directly to the Feather microprocessor in the final STELLA and can be tested on the breadboard like other components. To put this together, you're going to need the actual DisplayBoard unit. You want to make sure that this is the capacitive touch model and not the resistive touch model. You're also going to need a 3D printed spacer, a mini proto board, a 12 and 16 pin female headers, 20 pin male headers, and some wires, ideally solid and low gauge wires as they'll be easier to handle. For tools, you're going to want a pair of pliers, ideally small to be able to manipulate the wires. You're also going to want some wire cutters and strippers, and a multimeter with the ability to measure connectivity. Also, you're going to want to print out a guide paper like this one that can be found on the STELLA website, as this paper will have a coordinate system corresponding to the protoboard that we will use to reference points throughout this video. You can also make your own using post-it notes if you are unable to print this one out. So first, the DisplayBoard is going to need to be modified. You're going to want to solder close the gaps IM1, IM2, and IM3. Do not solder closed IM0. What this will do is change the interface mode to SPI, which will let you use the SPI interface side of the board for connections. But first, we're going to work with the mini proto board. We're going to take the female header pins, take the 16 pin and set this starting at coordinate C14 going up to T14, and the 12 pin is going to start at C22 and go up to N22. You want to be very careful that these are in the correct location, otherwise they will not be able to correctly connect to the microprocessor or fit in the STELLA's case. So it's very important that these are in the right location. Once you have that, you want to take a piece of tape and tape these to the board such that they are as straight as you can reasonably get them. Once these are taped on, you can solder onto the other side of the board. When soldering here, we recommend you don't solder every pin right away. You want to start with pins that are not going to be holding connections to them, such as T14, J14 through M14, and J22 through N22. The reason you don't want to solder all the pins is it can be easier to wrap wires around these if there's no solder in the way. Once you have that done, you're going to take the header pin, or the male 20 header pin, go on the leftmost side, that's going to be column 1, and slide this through such that the long side of the header pins are sticking through the direction that the female header pins are, like so. And then once you're ready, you solder this side. Again, same thing as before, you ideally want to just solder the parts that are not going to hold connections, as this will make it easier to wrap wires around later. So now we have the soldered header pins on the board. Notice that I only soldered the pins in which connections are not going to be made. It's going to make it just a little easier to connect the wires. Also, this is what a modified display board will look like. Now we're going to start making the connections. To do this process, you're going to take your spool of wire. You're going to want to strip off a decent amount at the end and place this through the pin to the left of where you're going to try to start. So I'm going to do this one, for example. Then you're going to measure it out to the pin you're going to end on. Go a little bit past that and cut the wire there. Now once you have this piece, going to turn around and take your loose wire and attempt to wrap it around the pin on the other side of the board, such that you get as secure a connection as possible to try and get that connected. Then on the other side, once you got an idea of how long it is, you're gonna also strip the other side, or need to strip a little bit more. And then just like before, you're going to wrap this side of the wire around the male pin on this side, such that you get both a as secure connection as possible, while also not interfering with any adjacent pins, since you want to be very sure to not connect the wrong pins together. You're going to repeat this process for all of these wires over here. While you can put these wires on in any order you like, I'd recommend starting with the short wires that go just a straight line across from here. So the order I went was the straight wires, little wire that loops down here, then the power and ground wires, and then lastly do the wires that go over to this other board. Just think it looks a little bit nicer. What really matters is that it's a flat surface over here, so none of the wires are sticking out over the header pins, or else they will catch on the casing when you try to mount it to the Stella. So once you've soldered the first few wires together, you're going to want to go through and make sure that you've not accidentally connected any of the wires. To do that, we're going to take a continuity tester and place them on the pins between the wires. We're not getting any connections, which is good. If you want to make sure that the wires themselves are working properly, you can flip it over to the other side and simply test by placing a connection on either side of the wire, and like that, you can see we are getting a connection. So now we've soldered in more wires, including the power and ground wires. When you're soldering in the power and ground wires, you definitely want to be very careful that these do not touch, or else it'll short the entire device. I know this can be a very tedious process putting this proto board together, but it's definitely worth taking your time in order to ensure the proper result. So now once you have all of the wires soldered on this side of the board, just like this, the next step is going to be flipping the board over, grabbing your 3D printed spacer, and fitting it along such that the male header pins are along the left side here. Then you're going to take your actual board component, make sure it's been modified, and make sure you're using the SPI interface side. Then placing that side such that it fits in with all the male header pins, and it should click into the 4 3D printed pins on the spacer. And then once you have all that clicked in, you're going to want to solder every pin on this side, so every pin on the male header, to the display board itself. So now once this is soldered in all along this side, your display board module is now done and complete. If you'd like, I put a piece of tape around this side that helps secure the proto board and the display board together. Although once this is mounted in the Stella, this whole thing will be pretty securely stuck in there, and this won't be necessary. But the last thing we're going to show you in this video is how to test the display board module using the breadboard as was made in the previous video. So to do this, we're going to orient the board like so, such that you can match the 12 pins here to the 12 pins on the feather, and these 16 pins to these 16 pins on the feather. And then we're just going to use jumper wires to match them across. Keep in mind that for the power, ground, clock, and data lines, you can just connect jumper wires straight from the buses we made and not directly to the feathers. So once you have all those connections secure, you can take your time with this, make sure that you get all the pins exactly right. After this, we're going to orient the board upwards so you can see it. And then we're going to run 2 test codes for this display board. You can load them up onto the board just like the last components. This is showing the first test code right away. The first test code you're going to want to load is called 2.8-inch TFT display. And the second test code is going to be called capacitive touchscreen and will appear on the board like so, which will show no touch unless you press any point on the board, and it'll give you a coordinate system for the position where you touched it. So these 2 test codes ensure that the display board's visual capabilities and capacitive touchscreen are working properly. And once you get successful readings on this, you'll know that your display board is working and can be mounted to the regular STELLA.